Thrilled to be recording a special edition, not only a panel for the event, but indeed this first live recording of the Streamtime Sports podcast, which I host weekly through the Sports Pro channels. We want to have a bit of a different conversation to perhaps what you're seeing in some of the other sessions. But for those that aren't familiar with the Streamtime Sports podcast, it's been around for nearly 2 years now, really laser focused around the sports media landscape specifically. We cover a lot of different topics regarding what moves are being made from social media players, the broadcasters, and of course, the sports properties and indeed big tech companies. And today, our focus is going to be a lot around the big tech space and the role that they're playing and we think may be playing in the years to come. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce my two guests on the show. Firstly, I'll start with Lydia Fairfax, who spent over 10 years within the Warner Brothers Discovery business, working in very senior roles across strategy, distribution, et cetera, and works as an advisor for several organizations in our sports media landscape. And Steve McCaskill, who's the technology editor for Sports Pro and writes a lot of great content, not only about technology generally, but indeed around the big media companies and, of course, sports tech and big tech itself. So we wanted to have a more of an independent view so we can be more speculative and pick apart what some of these big companies are getting their teeth into. So let's jump straight into it. And we're going to start to talk about Netflix. Now, for those that do follow some of the moves they've been making, as a reminder, they recently announced a 10-year, $5 billion deal with WWE to be the new home of Monday Night Raw. So all those WWE enthusiasts, make sure you're now signed up to Netflix in 2025. They've also done the Netflix Slam, the Netflix Cup, which is an F1 and golf tie-up, and obviously a home to major documentary series like Drive to Survive, Full Swing, and are still the home technically to Breakpoint, although that is now ceasing as of next season. So firstly, starting with you, Steve. I remember having a conversation similarly with you on stage at our event in Madrid, and I think maybe I was so bold as to say that I can't see why Netflix would make a move into live. And fast forward 12 months, and they have made several moves into the live space. So what's your take on their approach so far?
Well, I think it fits in broadly what they're saying, although I think it's harder for them to say we're not interested in live sport with a straight face anymore. You know, they want to control the events, which is why they've created these exhibitions, the ones that also promote their original content. And WWE, for all intents and purposes, is a sport. It behaves like a sport. Its program strategy is like a sport. So I think for them to say that they're not involved in sport is a bit, not disingenuous, but they basically are. It's live every week. It's, you've got all the pitfalls that come with doing that. But it's interesting in that in the US, it's for Monday Night Raw, which again is take network television. But the rest of the world, it's very much that global deal. It's everything. It's worldwide. I think it's a really smart move. I think you're going to get a lot of people who are really loyal to wrestling signing up and staying throughout the whole year. And of course, it is for the whole year. It's 52 weeks. And I think it's going to give them a chance to test their live infrastructure, and also crucially, they don't have to produce it. So I think it's fitting in with everything they've been saying so far. But again, I think it could be the precursor to something else.
Lydia, what's your view on that one?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, it's interesting what you were saying, Nick, and I similarly would have had a similar view into a couple of years ago about saying didn't think Netflix were going to do it. You know, just like they weren't going to introduce ad tiers, et cetera, et cetera. But you're right, it's an interesting move. But to Steve's point, it's appointment to view. It's every week, 52 weeks of the year. It's global rights. These are all, I think, the tick points that Netflix is going to be looking for if it is going to move into a bigger sports proposition. There's a lot of talk around UFC coming up. Very similar type of audience, a younger demo. You could see how, if this goes well, that might be the next foray into that sort of sports area. But what I thought was fascinating is that in a recent conference, I read that Ted Sarandos had actually talked about mass simultaneous reach and he talked about appointment to view. These are all very much, what we know as linear TV metrics. These drive big TV ad sales budgets. And, for a company that was, always very much the kind of the series drop and, consume in your own time in a bingeable way, this feels like a real shift in their strategy.
And obviously, you talked about UFC, the ownership of the WWE, and of course, UFC is the same company now in the TKO relationship and Endeavour. So it would be, no doubt, those conversations would definitely be had at the boardroom level. And I think it would be interesting to see if they do bring a linear proposition to the market. It sounds almost inevitable if they are going to continue to lean into live sports. So, Steve, bold prediction here. Will we fast forward 12 months from now and see Netflix board up every major rights available in the market?
I think there's only one, what we'll call a major conventional property. And I'm not saying I think this is going to happen. The NBA is the only one I think would perhaps fit in with their strategy just because of the audience. If they could do a global deal, NBA have synced their domestic and their international rights deals. So it could work from that point of view. But I still wouldn't put any money on it. I think we could see influencer boxing, hesitating to use the word boxing, but influencer events. But then there's also the possibility they could take a non-traditional event or an event that doesn't really have a huge following and turn it into a hit. So if you look at the charts in Netflix, they've got these really expensive prestige dramas. Is it Three Body Problems just come out? But then number 2 or 3 in the UK is a 5-year-old ITV drama that they would have bought for less than £100,000. So they can make hits out of something that wouldn't otherwise be a hit. So I wouldn't be surprised. I think World Surf League, or as we mentioned in the past, something like that, they can make into something bigger because they are Netflix.
And the discussion was that they might actually acquire the WSL, which was an interesting proposition. Yeah, look, Tom will tell, it also helps when you've got 250 million or whatever the number is subscribers. You can basically make anyone successful if you've got that much to play with. Let's keep things moving on to Amazon. Now, really interesting business to talk about because of all the different moves they've made over the last several years, starting with obviously the Premier League here, which they no longer have those rights to moving forward. They have they've also pulled out of the ATP game as well. They have got the Champions League still across UK and a couple of markets in Europe. They've got Six Nations. But then from there, it starts getting very strategic. The last few deals they've done some speculative deals in markets like Australia where they acquired swimming rights, and then they did a local deal in Seattle just for the Seattle region to do. I can't remember whether it was football or baseball or hockey or something. Okay, it must be Kraken, which would have been the hockey team, I'd imagine, given the ownership relationship there. So lots of weird niche moves, and then they were able to mop up all the Diamond Sports Group. Yeah. Rights for basically a penny, which gives them a huge breadth of new content. And on top of all those micro investments, let's say, into the sports landscape, which they seem to be very frugal with now, they seem to be mopping up anyone who's in distress with all these rights deals that they've been picking up over the last few years. So, Lydia, someone who's very familiar with Amazon and the Prime Video product, and I guess their approach to be more of an aggregator now than ever. What's your view on how they're taking and looking at sports these days?
Yeah, it's a fascinating case study with Amazon at the moment. I mean, as you say, they've sort of dipped their toe quite strategically in sort of single sports rights across single territories with a view to understanding what is driving Prime Video and what's driving Prime Video channels. When I was at Discovery, we did one of the first sort of sports aggregation deals with them where we licensed Eurosport Player onto PVC, so Prime Video channels. And as part of that deal, back at that time, the premise was very much that you send all your content to them, they ingest it, they host it on their proprietary platform, and then they effectively get to see all of the content that you're making available on your linear channels. And then can see what content is resonating, which audience it's resonating with. And, there was no surprise that at that time then Amazon, pitched and took the US Open tennis rights, for instance. So they obviously had seen, the sort of the ability that had on the Eurosport platform to be able to drive sports. And I think, to your point, they've definitely done that quite strategically going forward. They had a, perfectly designed pack with the Premier League, 6 years ago, 17 matches over 1 month, to coincide with Thanksgiving and Christmas, drove something like over 500,000 subscribers to Prime, I think, in the first season. But they're now in a different stage of their business, right? They're now not necessarily in pure acquisition mode, but in retention mode, and having rights which you can only exploit for 1 month a year isn't necessarily the way they're looking. Which is why I think the Champions League rights are much more interesting to them. They're over 17 weeks of the season. Again, a little bit like we were saying before, it's more of that appointment to view. And I think they're still just sort of testing the water in terms of where they think they can make their big investment. But, with the kind of the flywheel that they have, they've got the Thursday night NFL now. They've also got the a merchandising deal around that as well. They can afford to sort of put money in certain specific sports without necessarily having to do a global strategy around them.
So looking across what they could be doing, you mentioned or alluded to the idea of testing, and they seem to be testing for a long time now. It seems to be. I'm wondering whether they're not finding any solutions to what they expect and hoped out of sports. Steve, what's your view on perhaps the role that Amazon is playing, particularly across the more wider European market, and what could it or should it be?
It's a platform play. Everything Amazon does in the sports space is to support its other businesses, and it's been incredibly opportunistic, as we've said. I think that's partly because they don't want to commit a huge amount, but also partly they don't want to be seen that they've got loads of money, and everyone knows how much money that Amazon has. But if they're able to show that they are not going to freely spend it, I think that's what they want. I think we've got to. I mean, for just in the room, who here is an Amazon Prime subscriber?
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, and for the purposes of the tape, that's quite a lot of people, and I think that's the issue. So if you're looking at the Premier League deal, for example, that was two match days in December. They wanted sign-ups ahead of the Christmas shopping season, which is the busiest. I think after 6 years, you've probably got as many people to sign up as you're going to do with that. So the focus is now shifting to retention, and deals like the Champions League for 17 weeks a year are going to be much better at retaining those customers. The deal they've done in Sweden and Denmark, sub-licensing Premier League matches from Viaplay, that's also about retention. I think the same. You look in the US, where Thursday Night Football, which they've transformed that from a pretty unloved property or not really interesting to something that is now it's carved out a niche in that market, does a job for them. And if I was going to put money on a streamer getting the NBA, it would be Amazon for that year-round ability to retain customers. So I think they're moving from acquisition to retention. It's about platform play to support their wider businesses. And then if you look beyond Amazon itself, you mentioned channels. I think they see themselves as a kind of a platform. They've got Fire Sticks, they've got other services you can subscribe to. So they just want you to spend as much time in the Amazon ecosystem and continue to have that relationship with them.
So I was just going to pick up on that. I think you're right. I think one of certainly from my experience with negotiating against them, they have always prided themselves on being fiscally responsible, despite the vast profits that they're able to generate. I think that's another reason. I think you're right in terms of as soon as it became apparent that the Premier League wasn't going to create this new package for them, and they were going to have to sort of pony up from like 1.5 million a game to 6 million a game in order to get the package that Sky now secured. I think, and frankly, had they gone into that, they would have just inflated those rights even higher in a bidding war. They were never going to do something like that.
I know it wasn't free, but now they know what it feels like when the free trial expires.
So they've been very vocal about this notion and idea of being an aggregator, a destination, as you've talked to it. Just Lydia, can you talk a little bit more about what those types of deals look like? Because I think a lot of people, including myself, see those announced. There's TNT partnering with Sky, and then you'll see that Amazon's doing a deal with DAZN, but then DAZN's also a platform for a bunch of other sports properties as well. So there's these distribution deals on distribution deals. So just, can you give us a bit of a sense of what these types of deals look like? Or is it built around minimum guarantees or rev shares? How complicated can they get?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny actually. They can be as simple as you might imagine, and they can also be as complex as you could try to imagine. On the one hand, there's still very much a model in today's world of having a standard CPS for a bundle of channels. some of which might not be channels that the platform wants to take, but is required to take as part of the overarching deal that they have. And then the platform is then paying a CPS for each and every subscriber on their entertainment pack or on their sports pack, depending on how broad distribution you can negotiate. It could be as simple as that. It could be a fixed fee instead of, or as well as, a minimum guarantee on top of a CPS. Those are sort of the more standard, very much linear type deals.
CPS is a cost per subscriber.
Sorry, yes, a cost per subscriber. Yes. So for instance, if you have your channel in an entertainment pack, then you would be paid for every single subscriber in that entertainment pack, irrespective of whether or not that subscriber even ever turns onto your channel. And then similarly, and that's why you'd always look for. There's a balance between broadest distribution on the one hand, hence why you might want to be an entertainment pack, versus being amongst like sports. So there's some benefits to just being in a sports pack because, of course, you've got that neighbourhood proximity, you're up and down on your EPG and that discoverability of content, which is neighbouring other content you might have been watching. But in that, there's a second pay tier there, right? So, for instance, on Sky, you've got your 22 or 25 or whatever it might be now, £1 a month for your basic Sky pack, but you're paying an extra amount if you then want to take sports on top. So there was always a bit of a balance there between where you'd want your channel to be distributed. But in the new world now of where we've got OTT apps as well, we're seeing lots of different, interesting deals. Discovery did a deal when I was there where we bundled Eurosport Player, for instance, in with and Discovery Plus in with the Sky Basic pack. And for us, that was a great way for us to build scale with a sort of a nascent OTT product, but still retain the value of the deal we had with Sky by them still paying for the carriage of our linear channels on the network. And then over time, then that deal may sort of move away from linear carriage more into OTT only. And again, Sky is becoming a little bit of an aggregator too, right? It wants everyone to stay in its walled garden. They want everyone to take a Sky subscription, and then should you also be a Disney Plus subscriber or an Amazon Prime subscriber or anything, any of these SVOD services, that you access it via Sky. So you're not moving to a different walled garden. You stay within Sky, and then when you've come out of that app, you're back in Sky. And Sky then has greater visibility over the content that you're leaving the Sky environment for. So, what drives people to move into it. They can see some element of how long you've spent in the app, even if they can't see what you were actually watching within the app. But then when they come back into your environment, you've got them again. And also they're taking a rev share then on the sort of monthly or annual cost of those subscriptions. And the extent to that rev share will depend on the negotiating power of the parties. And Amazon does something similar with its PVC. But as you just alluded to, there are some sort of some JVs, but sort of commercial JVs or commercial partnerships, I think, that certainly we were exploring when I was there, and we're seeing a lot of now, where you bundle two separate apps, two different tech stacks, but there's a solution whereby if you buy them both independently, you pay the full RRP a month. But by virtue of a contractual arrangement, if you buy the two together, you buy them for an amount that's less than the combined total of the two. And then there's some sort of cross-promotion between the two different platforms. And that's when it can become a bit more complex in terms of how you reflect that balance or reflect that division of the fee, and sometimes then it's based on which content was a piece of content that acquired the subscriber. Was it company A's or was it company B's, or how much time you'll spend in each of the individual apps as to how you divide that rev share between you.
So in summary, it's very complex. I think that's what I'm taking away from that. So there's lots of different ways to approach how to do business in those types of aggregation deals. And I think the next one I want to talk about, it leans into that aggregator role as well. And you're obviously going to be seeing and hearing a trend here. And that's with what Google or YouTube are doing. Now, for those that obviously everyone's familiar with Google and YouTube, they're number one in consumption time. I think that's the most interesting stat coming out now, is that YouTube as a standalone product, not the TV product, but the YouTube as an app, is the number one platform, if I'm not mistaken, on connected TV devices in the US, which just shows the engagement that a platform like YouTube has in the market. They're the number one and number two search engines, so they've got audience, they're able to track what people are looking for and interested in. So they have the attention of the entire world, particularly in some of the most lucrative markets. And then they launch a product like YouTube Primetime Channels. So for those that have been building YouTube channels, generally you're building audiences, you're getting subscribers, you're able to generate revenue and income through ad-supported activity and maybe sponsored content. But then they come to the table with Primetime Channels, which is what they're hoping is going to be the big needle mover, I think, for further adoption of YouTube as a prime proposition. So, Steve, from your perspective, how do you see that move from YouTube to move into something like primetime channels, which, just to give further context, I suppose, is where you'll see broadcasters or anyone with a standalone product or proposition offering subscription access through YouTube's primetime channels app, which will give you access irrespective of how you come into it. So with one click, you could subscribe to, let's say, Discovery's channel through the YouTube platform and have access to them to watch all their premium content through YouTube. So not a different app anymore. And that's what they want, that they hope will remove a lot of the friction for subscriptions and subscribers to sign up to the product, which they've never had. Because if you're anyone who's been through the rigmarole of trying to sign up to a subscription product through connected TVs, it can be quite tricky if you really want to subscribe. So Steve, over to you.
Okay. No, I think it's like we say, look, I won't do another straw poll, but I think most people have YouTube on their phones, or at least use YouTube. It's become a de facto search engine for video. I think we'll look back when I think Google bought YouTube for $1 billion, and that might go down as one of the best acquisitions in corporate history. It was quite remarkable now when you think about it. And that reach means it's a really good way for people offering live TV or premium content to find new subscribers. Everyone knows how to use it. In many cases, there's a pre-existing billing relationship. And getting your channels out there, it's just easy to use, easy to subscribe. And people looking, let's say I'm looking for, I'm a Manchester United supporter, so I'm not looking for highlights from Coventry on Sunday. But let's say when TNT Sports have the FA Cup, I'm looking for those highlights. I can be directed to subscribe to TNT Sports through YouTube, for example. That's the customer journey I think they would like people to go on. And again, it just gives them a bit more dominance in that online video space. Here we have, you have your free videos, the ad-supported tier. You have influencers that you can subscribe to and monetary support. Then you have premium content. So it's about offering every tier of video you can through one destination. And there are some downsides to losing control of that from a broadcaster, but at the same time, you could be reaching a much wider audience than you would do otherwise.
And so the YouTube's approach in those instances is nothing to do with upfront money. It's all a rev share type of deal. They're also opening and enabling the opportunity for e-commerce and pay-per-view and generating more revenue through ad-funded models. The thought that comes to mind for me, for all those that have been trying to build walled gardens for so long, is do you just give up and you just embrace the fact that they have such an incredible relationship with audiences now, and within 1 or 2 clicks they can sign up. And one of the other things I think from a technology perspective that's quite interesting is that if you sign up through YouTube's primetime channels, they will have a relationship where that same sign up will work on the own destination of the partner. So in say Discovery's instance, it would be you sign up and you subscribed and paying through YouTube. You also have access to Discovery through their own channels as well. So again, that friction is just destroyed basically, which has been a main problem for the industry. I mean, Lydia, what do you see the role of, say, YouTube, particularly in the European market? Do you think it's going to keep growing its prominence in the same way we've seen them dominate in the US?
Yeah, it's interesting. Picking up on your single sign-on piece, and I think you're right. I think it depends, we need to move back to a world where we're fan first, right? What we've seen for too long is exactly this. It's the walled gardens, it's the individual login details for each broadcaster's app so that they can control the user journey, they can control the billing relationship, they can control all of the CRM, the messaging, and then they've got all of the data around that. The challenge with that, as you say, is that, who here has to sort of change their password on a regular basis because, it says forgot password, you change it, and then it pings up and says you can't use the last password. It happens to me all the time. It's insane, right? And this would do that. And I think the thing with YouTube is it's got this ubiquity to it now as well. I've just come off a piece of work with Everyone TV, and they're launching this IP solution called Freely, which is effectively Freeview for the IP age. And one of the things that we've been very focused on is where's that signposted on connected TV UIs, for instance. And YouTube is there in the top row on every single smart TV and every single UX that you can imagine. And it's usually within the first 3 or 4 app tiles. It's on the majority, if not all, of the remotes. So you've got this initial free window straight in. And as you say, then once you're in there, even if you're not necessarily directed straight away to prime time, you've got all of this free content, which is driving people into the apps. I think the challenge will be, and certainly this always used to be the kind of the rule of thumb, is that people didn't want you to be able to have a single sign-on that would work across all of the different ecosystems, because you do lose that control, you do lose the billing relationship, etc. But in a world where there is only so much store space and you can only have so many apps on your UI, and you can only have so much attention, and we're seeing so much attention leaking, and it's not even leaking, it is television to YouTube. I think they're very well placed.
So YouTube's going to dominate. Amazon's taking a chill pill, and I'm curious about the next one, which is Warner Brothers Discovery. Obviously, you have a little bit of background there, Lydia. So I'm going to lean into your experience in a second. But again, just a quick overview. Obviously, they're rebranded to TNT Sports in the UK. Have a whole range of rights ranging from the Premier League, Champions League, Olympics, rugby, WWE, Premiership Rugby. Eurosport is still in there. They obviously, one of the big moves they made, that I thought was a big shift, was the move away from shutting down Golf TV and the Global Cycling Network, or GCN, which historically made huge joint venture moves worth significant amounts of money and commitment, and ingested all that content into the Discovery Plus proposition. And obviously at the top end, they've been undergoing huge cost cuts to try and make the business more profitable, because they've been hemorrhaging money since they took on so much debt at that level. So just let's focus on the UK and the European markets. What do you think and see that Warner Brothers Discovery will be doing, from here, and the moves they've been making lately?
I think it's a really exciting time for the TNT team in the UK. When I was there, Eurosport was still a very big flagship product for us. But as you said, we had some niche sports apps as well, which for a long time there was a huge enthusiasm around in the business about growing.
Your favourite channel, Steve, isn't it?
I do love Eurosport, yeah.
But I think it became quite obvious once Discovery and then Warner Bros. Discovery, as they now are, moved into the D2C space, how difficult it is to get scale for a D2C product generally. And when you've got 4 or 5 of those, and you're trying to build you've got different genres, you've got different audience, and you're investing the same level in 4 different companies with 4 potentially, as was 4 different tech stacks, it's an uphill battle. So that whole kind of aggregation or re-aggregation piece, was the obvious way forward. And then the opportunity, which again was quite a tactical opportunity at the time to look at the BT assets. They'd already been in conversation with DAZN for quite a long time, and there was an opportunity to sort of join that process on a very accelerated
and a very last minute move, from what I heard.
accelerated time frame. But it completely changed the market. And for Warner Brothers Discovery, it was a great opportunity, right? Because with the Max deal and with the Warner Brothers merger, because of the existing relationships with Sky in UK, Germany and Italy, those rights and for Max are tied up with Sky until end of next year. And so they needed a kind of a midway play in order to keep the service relevant in the UK, whilst the rest of the world was moving to the new shiny Max product. So I think for them, that was, quite tactical at the time, but now I think they're seeing how interesting those rights are, and they've, renewed the Premier League, they've got Champions League. It's big.
So what about wider Europe? What do you think now? It seems they are trying to be more efficient. Now with the business, they've got a staple of rights to play with. They've got a whole catalogue of sports and entertainment content. Do you predict or think they might take it easy in Europe until things settle? Because they obviously have a European base with Eurosport, and that's enough for now, Lydia?
I think that they will consolidate, and I think that what they will want to do is to bank their position in Europe as one of the the sporting providers. They're not going to go in and bid hard for Premier League or Bundesliga or La Liga, in my opinion. Who knows, the strategy may well have changed since I was there, but certainly it seems to me as if that seems to be the way to go. But then equally, they have renewed their Olympics rights. They've got the Olympics rights again now out through 2032. They've still got tennis. They've still got a lot of sort of European, like EBU-esque rights, which are, still very good value drivers for them in terms of the linear business. And frankly, certainly in parts of Europe, the linear business isn't having the contraction that we're seeing in the UK. So I think it's still an important part of the bouquet.
I'm conscious of time, but I want to ask one or two more questions. Just very quickly, announcement came out last week. I know we haven't had a chance to cover a couple of companies we wanted to, but was it Disney Plus announced that they are getting into the live rights game? Obviously, Disney is owner of ESPN, Disney Plus Hotstar, huge investors into sports, but Disney Plus has not been a home for sports rights. That changed last week with the announcement they'll be securing Europa League and Conference League rights to the tune of 300 plus games a season in Sweden and Denmark. Steve, do you think this is sort of an announcement basically that they're here to buy up the European sports market?
Maybe not, but I don't. We covered it at Sports Pro, and I'm not sure we necessarily would have covered a broadcast getting exclusive second and third tier European club competitions if it wasn't the fact it was Disney Plus. And
we would have, because we are so detailed in our coverage, Steve.
I mean, Manchester United might be playing in the Conference League next year if they don't win the cup final. So who knows? So it's not my point to that was not to dismiss the competitions. It's more Disney Plus getting directly involved in sports rights is a big deal. Yes, as ESPN, but that's been very separate from the Disney Plus app. Of course, there's been bundles with Hulu. And then I think we can sort of see Disney Plus Hotstar as its own thing. I don't think that's reflective of the wider strategy for various historical reasons. Great. And obviously there's a merger in the works. I don't know if they're there to buy sport, all the sport, but I definitely think it's they're testing the water to see how it works on the platform, how those markets in particular respond, whether it has any impact on subscriber retention or acquisition, testing out the infrastructure. And in the grand scheme of things, in those two markets, they're probably not the most attractive rights, but they're certainly significant rights, given that those clubs from those countries are going to be more likely to be involved in those competitions. And of course, again, in both, Premier League is big. There's a lot of Premier League clubs in both of those competitions. So short term, I think we should watch to see. I'd be surprised if they made any huge splash. And I think we also should wait until after we see what's going to happen with ESPN in the US.
Yeah, and obviously a technology opportunity to test out the live tech stack if they haven't been doing that a lot on their existing VOD channels. So let's look at some of the questions quickly. Question on top, do you envisage clubs trying to take back some control for their match rights for OTT platforms and build their own linear channels? Steve, firstly, we'd start with you.
No, I don't think so. I think you've got predictable revenue streams. You'd have to unpick them from wider collective deals. If we're talking about football in particular, then no, I think there's a system. It might be flawed, but there's a system, and predictability is better than uncertainty.
Lydia, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think I'd agree. If we're talking Premier League-esque clubs, then I think you're absolutely right. I think there are, secondary channels which work really well, very fan-based channels which give that sort of additional value, create a community for people to be able to engage with fellow supporters. But I think you're right. I think, yes, as you say, there are some flaws in the system. It is a challenge. It is still, I still personally think the single buyer rule is a travesty and a tragedy for football. Despite used to work for one of the companies that's now the beneficiary of it, nonetheless. But I think interestingly, in some of the lower leagues, I think there is still an opportunity to do that, or there is an opportunity to sort of look at opportunities where you can aggregate some of your rights, if you're, say, a tier 2 sport or something like that, with other like-minded sports federations in order to come up with a platform that you might be able to use, particularly in the face of perhaps going into a renewal with a platform or a broadcaster and them effectively saying that they want to give you a massive rights cut. Looking at having a stalking horse or certain other options to distribution is never a bad thing.
One of the other questions here directed to you, Steve, was Red Bull's live events are mostly very niche and different compared to global mainstream sports. Would they fit somehow to Netflix's live strategy?
Yes and no. I think Red Bull's been very effective at harnessing some of these events for marketing reasons. It's created, it's got a whole content house around these. So I think it's sort of similar to the type of events I'm thinking of. I can't think of any in particular that would be a definite candidate, and also a lot of its partnerships are individual as well. A lot of its are, but then I guess the stuff it does with Danny McCaskill, for example, that could be something on Netflix. But I'm not sure that something like Red Bull Flugtag is going to push the needle the same way they might hope.
But I guess you could lean into that. Red Bull TV could basically be something they could hand over the keys to, so to speak, and put it onto the platform.
Probably, that would probably be more effective than just singling an individual event and have that lift all that content, put it on there. But again, I guess the downside is that content is designed to push energy drinks and to get people to mention Red Bull as many times as they want. So where that fits in what Netflix is trying to do. But yeah, I see the overlap if I'm not quite convinced by the actual concept.
If in doubt, the going theory is always they should just buy Red Bull, right? And that would just sort out all problems and make that work. Quick one I want to lean on before we wrap up is Apple. That's obviously the biggest player in the world for all things tech, but they have made relatively a small toe dip in the waters with regards to what they've done so far. 10 years, I think it's $2.5 billion with the MLS, if my numbers are correct. Steve, can you give me a little nod there?
Sorry, 10 years, $2.5 billion.
Yes, thank you. They reportedly secure something like 1 million subscribers on the platform for year one. Talking to the MLS, they say that that's on track with what they're expecting, although I wouldn't expect much else from them. They've been rumoured countless times of acquiring new sets of rights, but have failed to make any other moves. They've obviously launched the Apple Sports app, which has had a fair bit of coverage because it's Apple, but still the jury's out as to what's so fantastic about that app to this point in terms of what it's going to do that the rest of the other industry players don't have. So in short, sort of one line, I guess, what's your take, Lydia, on Apple's... Do you expect to see them make a move basically for another bigger set of rights, perhaps across Europe or alike?
In a word, no. I think unless the MLS experiment, pays huge dividends, significantly more than it's projected to do at the moment, I don't think they will. I think what they're very good at is being able to monetize content that they do acquire and using their entire sort of flywheel to make that most interesting content that we talked earlier on about, when Messi was announced as moving, that it was his image on the top of the Apple iStore for like 3 days. I mean, that kind of that inventory is completely priceless, and they were able to sort of drive huge traffic as a result of that. So I think it's really only ever going to be where there is complementary content to what they're trying to achieve. I can't see it.
It feels like they have to make another move though, Steve, doesn't it?
I'm not sure Apple knows what it's doing with sport just yet. I think it's definitely more an aggregation play, bring more people to make sport a feature of the Apple ecosystem. I think that could be what they're trying to do. Yeah, they probably do need another sport. And just they are being linked with the Club World Cup on a global deal for $1 billion. So that could be their next move. Wait and see. Apple usually doesn't do things without a plan, but it isn't afraid to withdraw if it's not going well. There's all sorts of talk about connecting. It was working on cars. We've not seen much of that. So, yeah.
Watching some live sport while driving the car sounds like a really smart selling point. But look, that is all we've got time for. I think the summary I would take away from this is we talked a lot about aggregation, the main play. Talked a lot about partnerships over the notion of big media rights checks is thinning out pretty quickly. So a lot of it is to do with enabling. All the big tech companies seem to be playing that role. And I really feel that Europe is just at the starting point of that journey, given what we're seeing in the US market. So that's all we've got time for. Thanks to Lydia and to Steve for joining me. And if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure you do subscribe to Stream Time Sports podcast on your favourite podcast channels. Thanks very much.
Now, before you go, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate and review and just let me know what you think on social. You can find me on most social platforms as SportsProNick. And please do spread the word of the podcast. There's no better way of marketing than word of mouth, whether that be in person or on social media. And if you don't like what you've heard, or you think we should be doing more or less of something, then reach out and let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Stream Timers. Until next time.